So again, just put the numbers of who's with you, how many people are engaging right now, and that would be really helpful for them. And again, that's where questions can go to, and we'll chat at the end. So, all right, so why I wanted to talk about this today. Many of us live in a world, right, where if we are parents, we want to protect our children from harm and unpleasant things. And I understand that. Or we want to say things to them, right, about, well, we just love everybody equally, right? We want to see everybody the same. And we think that we've done enough. I know a lot of us were raised to not talk about race because we were told that that was, inappropriate to mention race and to talk about race. And one of the books I'm reading had mentioned that basically in the 1960s, there was that shift where all of a sudden, before that, it was people saying all kinds of colorful and inappropriate and hurtful and evil things about race. And then all of a sudden, white people became dead silent about race, thinking that this is going to solve the problem as if we just stop talking about it. And so I know for myself, I was raised where we didn't talk about race. I'll share a story later on about how I was even hushed once as a child, which I don't blame my parents. They were just doing what they thought was the best at the time. But what I found is that children pick up on racial cues around them, even when no one is talking with them explicitly about race. Studies have shown that babies as young as 6 months old recognize racial differences, and that by age 2, children are already showing racial preferences, and by age 4, they're already determining racial biases. And I want to read you a story from a book, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, which I'm going to talk about later. I actually have a copy in my bag. But I think this story is so important for us to realize why, again, as parents, as educators, we have to be talking about race. She writes that there were 3 psychology researchers who tested 283 white children, and they put them into 2 groups, 6 and 7-year-olds and 9 and 10-year-olds. These children were asked to allocate money to white and black children, sometimes with a white adult in the room and sometimes with no adult in the room. They wanted to see if having an adult present would influence their behavior. The researchers found that the younger group discriminated against black children in both conditions, both with and without the white adult, while the older group of children discriminated against the black children only when no adult was present. This finding is significant because it shows that the older children clearly had racial prejudices and biases and acted on it, but hid it when an adult was present. Thus, children showed that they did not become less racially biased with age, but that they had learned to hide their racism in front of adults. The psychologist also found racial hostility in children as young as 3 years old. So though most of us want to believe our children are colorblind, this is absolutely false. And to continue believing that they're colorblind or not talking about it, honestly, prevents us from addressing racism and the inequalities that have been shaped by centuries of racism, which kids are already observing. They're already allowing the world to create these biases and narratives, even if we're not talking about that. And I'll tell you, my mind was just blown reading that, because again, children are taking in information about race, even if we are not actively talking to them about it. So we have a chance to help educate and form our children's understanding about race, and not even understanding, but helping them to start doing the work of anti-racism, which means actively working against racial policies and prejudices that exist and that are continuing to happen, whether it's blatant racism or a lot of it is not blatant kinds of racism, and we'll talk through that in a little bit. And basically our attitude is we can't solve this problem if we're not willing to name it and understand it. And though again, we love the sentiment that everybody's equal, we're gonna care for everybody equally, and that's all we need to talk about. That sentiment's nice. The reality is that there are systems and structures in place that we need to be aware of, and there's some that we may not even be aware of that are contributing to racial harm and inequality. And I'll tell you this story real quick. I had mentioned before when I was young, I don't remember the story, so that tells you how little I was. We had seen somebody with brown skin, and so obviously I had never seen that as a child before, and I mentioned to my mom, oh, look at that person's brown skin. And she immediately shushed me, right? We don't talk about those things, that's rude, what you have done. And I was reading in Robin DiAngelo's book about why do we shush children when it comes to talking about brown skin? Why do we shush children? She's basically talking about how that's a bias that's worked our way into the system that we may not have even understood or acknowledged. an unconscious bias. She said if our child saw a person and said, what a beautiful haircut, or what a great shirt, we wouldn't shush them. But there's some kind of logic that we've worked into our brains as white people that if a child mentions a skin color different than our own, we quiet them down. And so again, inadvertently teaching them there's something that needs to be silenced or quieted or shameful about being some other skin color other than our own. And again, I don't want us to get into shame if we've done that with our own children. We're all learning right now. And along this journey, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to say things that might not be right. But again, I want us to all be willing to continue to learn, to admit our mistakes, and just keep going. Because again, I've made my own mistakes, and I will continue to make my own mistakes on this journey. But it's about being committed to learning and trying to do better. And so the goal is that regardless of age, we want to be honest, be direct, and engage in these conversations with the kids in our lives. We were trained not to talk about race as white people because we thought it was rude, but racism adapts, and our silence has not made it go away. And again, if we've been paying attention into the news at all, which is kind of why we're here tonight, we know that's true. It hasn't gone away, and we're still seeing problems, and maybe seeing problems that we have always existed, but now because of the advent of camera phones, we're seeing these things that we can't deny anymore, that again have existed for hundreds of years now. And if anything, silence reinforces bias and lets racism go unchecked. So again, our goal for tonight is to advocate for a better way. By being proactive with the children in our lives, you are helping them build a positive awareness of diversity and not leaving them to fend for themselves or just to absorb what society tells them about race. So what I want to do is talk through 10 tips for teaching and talking to kids about race. And again, I thought about this in terms of parenting, but I also think, because I know I have some educators here tonight too, which is great, some of this can be applied to the classroom for when you're teaching, kids ask questions, students ask questions, especially younger children. This helps us to know how do we engage with children as they're exploring these questions. And so these 10 tips are, again, not anything that I've created on my own. A lot of what we're going to talk about has been compiled. I've compiled from other resources, primarily from Embrace Race, which is a website, as well as The Conscious Kid. And I want to tell you at the end, something I've spent the last few months doing is compiling a huge list of resources for all kinds of different facets of information. I work in a church, so I have a list of church resources, I have a list of parenting resources, I have a list of general resources. And at the end of tonight, if you want, I can both send what we've talked about as well as that list of resources, especially because a lot of resources you can engage here at the library, which is why I'm glad we're doing this tonight, because you have a resource here to help you have these conversations, to help you educate yourself. So again, don't worry about trying to take notes or getting overwhelmed. All of this can be sent to you. I do say don't get overwhelmed because it is going to be a lot of information, but it's just about finding a place to get started. Or if you've already started having these conversations, it's about finding a place to build from and continuing to engage in these conversations as you move forward. And so again, what I'll do is I will talk through, like I'll tell you tip number 1, and then underneath will be some information, and then I'll make sure I tell you tip number 2, because you'll be thinking, wait, am I on 2, am I on 3? So I'll make sure that I let you know where we're at in this. But just know I have lots and lots of resources that I'd be more than happy to send. Resources for children who are babies all the way up through us as adults. So keep that in mind. So the first tip is to start early in your conversations, or to just start at all. Even if your children are older, it is never too late to start having these conversations. Be proactive. Don't wait for your child, your teen, your young adult to bring it up. And don't wait until they're a certain age. I know that's one of the things when I've engaged with parents, they worry, oh, again, my child's so young. I just don't know. I want to wait till they're older. This all just seems so tough. But like we talked about earlier, children as young as 6 months, 2 years old, 4 years old are already developing prejudices and biases or engaging with information the world is telling them. So it's never too early to start. So let your child know it's perfectly okay to notice skin color, to talk about race, and to start talking about what racial differences mean and don't mean. Practice what you want to say even before you say it, and know, like I said, we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And I think one of the best things, I was a youth pastor. I worked with teens and families for a very long time. I don't anymore, but I think as I was, and now as a parent, I think one of the best things we can do as parents or as teachers and as educators is to admit and own our mistakes in front of children, right? In front of our children. And it's okay to let them know when we do make mistakes in these conversations, but that we're committed to working and doing better. I know that Nickelodeon, we just watched this the other day. Nickelodeon did a 45-minute special on race and what's been happening in the world. And that is an excellent resource. I have that in my list. Even for parents or even for educators, that is an excellent resource to talk through some of these things that are happening. As well as CNN and Sesame Street did a 3-part special for younger kids. The Nickelodeon was really geared towards older elementary and younger middle school. But again, both of those specials had a lot of resources just for adults as well. So even if, again, your kids are grown, they're not preschool age for Sesame Street, I watched it and it was really helpful because they had adult experts who just talked to the adults during those times. And again, more resources for how to talk to your kids at various age levels and just kind of doing more explanation about what's happening in the world and more of the systems and structures in place, and even about how your kids or your students can get engaged and involved. So again, that is a great place to start as well, is to sit down and watch that with them and then start your conversation after that. Tip number 2 is to encourage your child to ask questions, share observations and experiences, and be respectfully curious about race. You don't have to be an expert. Like I said, I don't think any of us are experts on this, myself included, but be honest with them about what you don't know and work with your child to find accurate information. Notice what your child might be learning about race from their favorite books or shows or movies. If all the characters look the same, ask your child what he or she thinks about that. Try not to respond with judgment, but understand that your child may know some or may know nothing, or again, may have already picked up some biases on their own. And again, it's not about guilting or shaming them, but just kind of learning, what do they already know, what do they not know? And then you can better prepare yourself for conversations in the future. Expose your child to different cultural opportunities, films, photographs, books, museums, cultural events, and discuss the experience afterwards. And you're going to hear that a few times. We'll talk more about that as well. Number 3 is to be mindful. What kids hear from us is less important than what they see us do. So we're role models to our children, to our students. What you say is important, but what you do, the diversity of our friendship circle, is likely to have a bigger impact. And again, that's on me as well. You know, my friendship circle is not very diverse, and that's something that's been very heavy in our hearts lately, is for our son to be able to see people who look like him, to have role models in his life who look like him. And again, it's on us to be more intentional about finding those spaces for him to do that. And so if your child does not attend a diverse school, consider enrolling him or her in an after school or weekend activities or art programs that are as diverse as possible. And then choose books and toys that include persons of different races and ethnicities, especially for young children who play with dolls or action figures. That's something easy to do, is have a doll who represents a different race, because then that just becomes part of the toys that they play with, right? And part of the conversations you can have. I also think about books, and again, we'll talk more about, the library has tons of resources that feature children, families, people of different racial backgrounds, and that's so important for children because a lot of books, media, content produced is predominantly for white people, featuring white faces, white stories, white audiences, all of these things. So again, that's an easy way to help children see diversity, is through the books and the content and the toys that they're playing with. I would even encourage, especially educators of young children, to have crayons available that feature different skin tones. I know Crayola makes skin tone crayons now, and that's really important for them to see. I remember distinctly when my son was in 1st grade, he kept bringing home pictures of he would draw with crayons and they would have white skin. And I remember asking his teacher, and she's like, I know, I keep offering him different crayons. And that was good. But again, if we continue at even a younger age to just say skin colors come in all different shades, we can use all the colors, and that helps them normalize that, again, there's not anything wrong about being a different color skin. But again, it's part of the society that we live in. The 4th thing, and the next 2 are going to be a little tougher for us, so stick with me, is to face our own biases. To let your child see you acknowledge and face your own biases, because we're less likely to pass on the biases that we identify in ourselves and we work to overcome. And I know that's really hard because we all want to believe that we have no biases, that we are people who believe in racial justice, we don't see skin color. But the truth is that we have had biases ingrained in us since we were babies, since we were young. And so we need to take the time. And again, I have resources that can help us do that. I'm going to keep referencing this book because it's been really impactful for me, is D'Angelo's White Fragility, because that book helps us as white people to work through our biases and the feelings that we have, the inability to admit some of our own biases, and really be truthful with ourselves. Because when we do that, we can be truthful with our children. So keep that in mind. It says talk to your children. But if they see you, and this is about biases, for example, if they see you act fearful around people of color, if they see us lock our car doors in certain neighborhoods, that's communicating something to them. If they hear us, or if they hear people around us making insensitive racial comments or even jokes, and we don't stop the people doing it, or we don't stand up against those things, that's communicating something to our children, that those things that people are saying are okay. And again, like I said, research has shown that kids of all races develop a preference for whiteness at a young age and carry that through adulthood, again, ourselves included. So it is a challenge to work through those things that have been ingrained in us. But again, you can even start these conversations with your children by saying, I see people in this photo, in this movie, in this book that are all white. What do you think about that? We've been talking about racism. Do you think that racism might make it harder for Black people to become important leaders? Questions like that as you engage with, again, even I would tell you, if you've got young children, go look at their books and you could see how many of their books just feature white characters, right? The fifth one, and again, this is going to be the hardest one, so please stick with us. After this, it'll get a little bit easier. But I want us to go to some uncomfortable places, because again, if we continue to remain comfortable, nothing will ever change, right? Because right now we are comfortable. Right now, being white people, we do have a certain level of privilege. We don't have to think about our skin color a lot when we leave the house or when we operate in the world. We don't have to think about the things that affect other people. But the fifth thing is to name whiteness. And listen to me when I say this. Being white is not wrong, is not bad. If you're in the church, it's not sinful. That's not what I'm saying. But it's important to name whiteness for white people to identify as white, because not naming or claiming the word white masks whiteness. It masks white supremacy. It masks white privilege, power, and history as members of the dominant racial group. And again, this is complicated because we hear this. We hear some of these words and our defenses go up. But I want you to listen. We belong to the dominant racial group who holds the dominant power in our country, and we have since the inception of this country. Like I said before, I've spent my life not even thinking about my race when I walk out the door, not even thinking about my race nearly ever. Again, because we're the dominant group. People of color don't have the same lived experience, leading to inequity and injustice that we've been blinded to by our whiteness because we don't have to think about it. So when white kids learn about racism, or even when we continue to learn about racism, because again, the more you learn, you will learn some really difficult history, our children and us may begin to experience guilt and shame. And my encouragement to you is to push through the guilt and shame, because guilt and shame centers us and our feelings back into the story and the narrative. And we want to center the stories and experiences of others when it comes to racism and racial injustice. So again, don't be afraid to recognize the privilege that whiteness has had for all of us. Our inability to do this is what perpetuates racial systems. What you can do with your children, with your students, is to share with them examples of white people who have utilized their power and privilege to take action against racism and oppression, and how they can commit to doing the same. And that is the goal. If you take away anything from tonight, that is the goal, is that yes, we were born white, our children are white. Again, there is nothing evil about being white, but there is power and privilege, and it can be used for good. And that's what we want our children and our students to begin to do, is harness that power that they have and that privilege that they have to use it to fight against injustice and inequality. Tip number 6, develop racial cultural literacy by learning about and respecting others. Study and talk about histories and experiences of groups we call African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and whites, among others. Again, it goes back to books, museums, documentaries, movies. I'll tell you, several years ago, I had a chance to go to Washington, D.C. with my cousin. We had some time to kill, and we were in the Smithsonian area. We had obviously, as children, as 8th graders, been to several of the Smithsonians, but we thought, you know what, we've never been to the National Museum of the American Indian. Let's go there. And we spent 2 hours there and walked around in silence, completely, I can't even describe the emotion, overwhelmed by the amount of history that we didn't know about the experience of Native Americans, not even about the experience. We get a very sanitized version of history when it comes to the Native Americans, right? And so we had an opportunity to go and be exposed to a history in a culture that we had really never been exposed to. And I'm so thankful because she and I were able to process afterwards that experience. But I think how vital that is for you to have the opportunity to do those things with your kids now. So that your kids aren't my age. I was 30 at the time processing this by myself and really blown away. And again, it shouldn't have taken until I was 30 to know that kind of history and the oppression and the genocide and all of the things that came along with it. So that, again, I can better understand what is the experience of Native Americans in our country today, where those systems are not completely gone. And so any of those opportunities you get to do with your children, with your students, where you can expose them to different cultures, different ethnic identities, I think is wonderful. And be sure that your child understands that every racial group and ethnic identity includes people who believe a variety of different things, right? No group is a monolith. Every group has diversity even within their group, and that's important for kids and students to know as well. The 7th tip is to be honest. To be honest with your child in age-appropriate ways about bigotry and oppression. And again, I know our tendency is to sometimes shield our children and our teens from hardships because we know the real world for adults is hard. We want them to be as innocent as they can be for as long as possible. But I will tell you, years spent working with teens and parents, and I would always, always, always tell them, the reality is we need to prepare them from the world, not to shield them from it. We get the opportunity to set the narratives when we have these conversations with the kids or the students or the people in our lives. Parents of Black children don't get the luxury of shielding their children, and the conversations start early. Again, my husband and I are white people. We are not Black. And so we ride this strange line where, because we have a Black son, we have power, we have privilege, we don't know what it's like to be Black in America, but we can't be ignorant because our privilege won't protect our son. If people see him on the street, they won't even know he's Ethiopian. And Ethiopia has a really rich history of its own. So not only, like I said, does he have to come to terms with what it means to be Black in America, but he also has a separate history of what it means to be Ethiopian. But when people see him on the street, they're not even going to know that about him. They're just going to see the color of his skin. So we had the conversations with him about, you can't do these things. You can't wear your hood up. You can't play with a toy gun. You can't be outside in the dark by yourself, because we worry about what would people think. And some of those fears we have about when he used to be a teenager. What will people perceive him? Because we know that Black children are perceived to be older, even though they could still be very young. So again, we've had those conversations. How does he interact with police? Even now we've begun to have those conversations. And I don't say that because we don't want pity. That's part of our life and we've accepted it. But I say that to realize that as white parents, you have the opportunity not to have those conversations if you don't want to. But there are all kinds of families and parents who don't have that privilege, where those conversations start as soon as children begin to understand. And children are observant. They are amazing at noticing patterns, including racial patterns. They notice who lives in their neighborhood and who doesn't live in their neighborhood. They notice who is in class with them. They notice who their teacher is and the color of their teacher's skin and how many people look like them and don't look like them. We've had those conversations in our own home. Our son is acutely aware of who looks like him and who doesn't look like him, and that he's one of the darker skinned kids in his school. Even the other day, we had bought a new car and we were driving through a part of Cleveland, and I didn't say a word to John. And when we got home that night, I said to him later on, what did you notice about that neighborhood we drove through? And he said, well, I noticed that there were a lot of rundown homes. There were really no businesses, no grocery stores, and that everybody had the same skin color as me. And I was blown away by how observant he as a 9-year-old was. And what he was noticing were the policies of something called redlining. If you don't know what redlining is, Google it after tonight. It was and still perpetuates a racist policy of allowing certain ethnic groups and racial groups to live in certain areas and certain ones to not live in areas. It denied Black people home loans. It kept Black people impoverished and run down neighborhoods. And those, even though those policies were legal 70 years ago, the effects of it are still seen today. And my son saw that. He saw that. And so we had an opportunity to talk about redlining and what that meant and how that injustice still perpetuates today. So again, children are observing all the time, even if you're not having a conversation with them. And that's really what I want parents to know. Kids are much, I mean, I'm sure those of you who are parents know, like children are scarily observant sometimes, things that you don't think they've even paid attention to, and all of a sudden you found they pay attention to. So again, instead of shielding, be sure your child knows that the struggle for racial fairness is still happening and that your family can take part in the struggle, right? And that's the hope in all this. And that's the end conversation in all this is, okay, yes, this is still happening. This is going on, but what can our family do, or what can I do to help be a part of making things more just and more equitable in this area and in this country and in this world? The 8th tip is to tell stories of resistance and resilience. You don't have to avoid topics like slavery or Jim Crow or lynching or police and racial brutality, but give them the facts and focus on resistance and allies. Because every big story of racial oppression is also a story about people fighting back and speaking truth to power. Teach your child about those parts of the story as well, including stories about women, children, and young adults, because oftentimes they get left out of the narratives. And I know that many of us know about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, but encourage them, and for yourselves too, to begin to do research on other people who stood up to injustice. Ida B. Wells, Claudette Colvin, Ella Baker, Robert Moses, so many others whose names we don't know or stories we don't know. Teach your children about these people. As well as I would challenge you, even our version of Martin Luther King Jr. has been very sanitized, very sanitized. I mean, he was deeply unpopular. And even some of his views towards the end of the 60s really radically changed, but we don't know that part of history. It has been sanitized starting in the 1990s to make him more palatable for white audiences. So even look up a richer history about some of the people who we do know and help them, again, to hear those stories about resistance and resilience. The 9th tip is to be active. Don't be a bystander on race. Help your child understand what it means to be and how to be a change agent, right? It's not just an understanding about race, but doing the work of anti-racism, which is, again, standing up against policies, practices, even the talk or jokes that are racist, because that's the goal. Whenever possible, connect these conversations you're having to the change you and your child want to see and how you can be a part of bringing that change. I'll tell you, this week, I don't know if many of you have known, Mentor was doing a racial justice week and had different events every single night. Tonight, they were inviting everybody to Mentor Headlands to have a conversation about race. Anybody could be a part of that. I know that they met with the Mentor Police Department on Monday. I had hundreds of people there who were just asking about policing and police policies. And I know Friday, they're having a peaceful march. It's starting at Veterans Park in Mentor at 6 p.m. I can get you that information. I know our family is going to attend. Not that attending a rally automatically fixes racism, it doesn't. And we often have to be careful that we're not patting ourselves in the back and thinking, well, I did my part, I went to a rally or a protest, my work is done. That's not the case. But if anything, it shows your kids that there's a movement going on, that there's something to be a part of. And we've been assured that the march in Mentor is going to be peaceful, the police know about it. Again, a lot of the protests and the marches have been peaceful. I know the news likes to highlight the few that have gotten violent or there's been looting. And so unfortunately in our minds, we think that's the norm. That has not been the norm. Vast majority of these things have been peaceful. So again, if that's something you can be a part of, it helps your children to connect the dots and see you being active and encouraging them to be active as, again, we fight for racial equity. And I'll even tell you, I know Madison had a peaceful protest a few weeks back against racial injustice. And I know that there are things being planned even in Madison as we speak as well. So there may even be opportunities to get involved in your own community. And that's a great way, again, don't shield your child from these things. Be safe. If you don't feel safe coming, we still are living in a time of COVID. Do what's best for your family. But I'm just listing this as an opportunity to show them that you can be active, and this is how you can be active, and this is how you can continue the conversation with them. And the last thing is to plan for a marathon, not a sprint. It's okay to say to your kids or your students, I'm not sure. Let's get more information, or let's come back to this issue later. And make sure you come back to it. There may be times when you need to take a break. I know for myself, I have been ingesting so much information. I was telling a friend yesterday that one of my things when I feel like the world is out of control, I try to read as much as I can, because like that's my way of pretending like I have control over anything. So I've just been ingesting so much information, and then it just gets to the point where it's overwhelming. and I don't sleep and I have high anxiety. And so sometimes you just have to take a day to refresh, but then commit to getting back into this work, right? So often throughout history, we see people get really fired up and then immediately fade away because this work is hard. These conversations are awkward and they can be difficult and we don't know the right things to say. And so it's easier to say nothing or do nothing or go back to how things used to be. But we're living in a really fascinating time in history where we have an opportunity to be a part of a real change and help create a more just and equitable world for every child and every family. And so again, think about the beautiful things that we can teach our children about being a part of that so that they're creating a better future for their children and their children's children moving on into the future. So again, make race talks with your children routine. Race is a topic you should plan to revisit again and again in many different ways over time, even as your kids become adults. Some of you have adult children. Keep having these conversations. Even if your kids are young, what we found, my coworker today was telling me how she wanted to talk about George Floyd with her 5th grade son and 7th grade daughter, and she just assumed they hadn't heard anything. But they already knew, because again, we're so interconnected now. Kids know more than you think. Young adults are more engaged than you think. Again, continue to have these conversations even as they become adults. I mean, I'm almost 40 and I'm still having these conversations with my parents now. So keep having these conversations. Yes, it's uncomfortable. The world is hard, but like I said, if this was your child or your grandchild or your student, who you knew this was their reality, that the world is not safe or fair or just or equitable, wouldn't you want the whole world to turn upside down to bring your child that kind of a world? That's what I want for my son. That's what I want for all of the children in this community and in this state and in this area, right, who are not white children, is to have a world where they don't have to worry about walking outside the door and what they're wearing or the toy they're playing with or how they engage or interact with the world. And what I want for my son is friends who understand and are willing to do the work of anti-racism. Because there are a lot of people in the world, again, we don't like to think of ourselves as racist, but we have to take it a step further, where we're teaching ourselves and our children to speak up, to work against policies. And I know that a lot of us like to think, oh, here in Madison, we don't have these things happening. But I can tell you a story, and I'm gonna try to tell it as vaguely as I can. I had a coworker who used to help in the school systems, used to help coach. He was a lot younger and was part of a conversation with a number of different coaches, all white, who were together making comments about some students of color on the team. Inappropriate, horrifying jokes. And I just went through the roof. And my poor coworker, again, very, very young, didn't have the confidence to speak up, was beating himself up because he didn't have the confidence to speak up. But I just thought, oh my gosh, guys, it is in this town. It is here. We don't want to admit it, but even people in our family, right, or our teachers or our coaches. I know students in this community of color who've played sports and had students on other teams call them racial slurs and had no teammates speak up to say anything. And so our students of color are left to speak for themselves. Imagine, again, if our children and our teachers and our coworkers could utilize their power and privilege as white people to step up and say stop. And I know that's hard. It is uncomfortable. I've even found myself in situations where I kick myself because I didn't say something at the time. So I'm right there with you. I have not mastered this, but that's the challenge. That itself is the work of anti-racism, is so that my son and other students in this community know that they have allies, that they're not alone in this fight. And so it starts with us as parents. How do we teach our children? How do we teach our students, if we're educators, that again, these things aren't okay, and the biases we may have or may see are not okay, and we are going to work to dismantle them. And so again, I have so many resources on this list. And I keep saying to you, I'm on this journey with you. I'm not an expert. I have not arrived. I will never have arrived. This is a lifelong journey for me about learning and understanding and working to dismantle these systems as well. And I'll tell you, the library has a plethora of books available, books that teach about race and anti-racism, books that show diverse characters and cultures, books that show positive examples of people filled with joy, right? Because your white children need to see that too. It's not always just struggle and depression and hardship, but there is art and there's joy and there's creativity and there's innovation and all of these things, rich histories of diverse backgrounds that your children need to see as well. So they see this wide range of what life is like to be a person different than themselves. And I have a list of resources for adults because, again, we need to be learning alongside of our children and modeling for them that this is lifelong learning as well. And I'm not saying you have to read a book once a month from here until the time you die, but commit yourself to reading some books or watching a movie or a documentary or even listening to a podcast or even something as easy as adding diverse voices to your social media. That's been very, very helpful to me, is adding those diverse voices to my Twitter account. I'm not really on Facebook, but the times that I am on there, that has been one of the easiest ways to begin to learn from other people, is by doing something as simple as that. And what I really want to encourage you to do is, when you are looking for media, for books, for content, really try to avoid content where they center white people as white saviors. That's a whole different talk for a different time. But you really want to find content that is created, right? Created by people who understand the struggle, who represent the group, the culture that's being shown in the content. I'll give you an example. And again, I'm not saying you can't watch these movies or enjoy them. We did, but I think about the movie, The Green Book, right? The Green Book was an interesting movie, a fascinating story, but it centered a white person in the story about race. And so again, it's a good entertaining movie, but that's not a good educational movie for us, all right? So again, I'm not saying you can't watch those movies, but if you're looking for a movie that can really help you understand the experience of what it means to be Black in America, or the history of slavery and oppression that still leads to systems in place today in 2020, you want to find content and media created by those Black and diverse voices. So for example, I think about the documentary 13th on Netflix is a great documentary. I think about the movie 12 Years a Slave, or Selma, or Fruitvale Station. Again, Black writers, Black directors who can adequately show us what does it mean to be Black in America today or throughout history. So always try to strive to look for content, again, created, written, directed, produced by people who represent the group that they're talking about. And the last thing I want to say, and again, we're going to kind of diverge a little bit, but this is something that I become acutely aware of and I feel like needs to be said, especially to those who have white teenagers or are going to have white male teenagers in the future. There is a serious threat, and this is real, of white nationalists recruiting specifically teenage boys online. And I know that sounds alarmist, right? But it's a growing trend. And it's one we've seen with teen boys inside our church. And it's one that we found out from a former student close to our family who is very bright and highly educated. And it was so, so shocking when we had that conversation and found out the direction that he was moving towards and how he had been moved into that direction. So I want to share resources again, because please, please, please don't assume your students and your teenage boys or your young adult boys or even girls aren't part of this or aren't ingesting these messages. Again, the easiest thing we can do is say, well, that's not happening in my house. But you don't know that. The Washington Post did an article, I have it in my resource guide, about a mother who this had happened to her son. And she writes about, she ended up doing research on how could they get him out of this. And she found that white nationalists and alt-right groups use jokes and memes as a way to normalize bigotry while still maintaining plausible deniability. And it works very well as a recruitment strategy for young people. She said children and teens at this age are likely to respond to the pull of community and a sense of purpose. Even if they don't readily identify with the group's core message, for parents who struggle to understand how extremist indoctrination can happen to good kids, it's helpful to keep their developmental vulnerability in mind. The recruiters are really good at understanding that pull of belonging and finding kids who feel isolated or disconnected, kids who spend a lot of time on the internet. And so she was urging parents to talk about these issues with kids, but talk about them in a way that avoids shame and defensiveness, because shame and defensiveness pushes kids away and they won't engage with parents. But she described how she sat down with her kids so they could look through Instagram together and talk about some of the images that they were seeing, some of the memes, some of the GIFs, some of the videos. She said it's such a great tool for parents because there's no blame there. It gives you a peek into what your kids are seeing online and what the people they follow are sharing, but it doesn't come from a place of, oh, you did this wrong. But once you help teenagers and young adults understand they're being manipulated, they don't want to be manipulated. So again, please, 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 I say this as, again, somebody working in a church where this has happened, don't be naive and think this couldn't happen to your child, to your teenager, to your young adult. Again, just be aware, engage with them, with the media and the content that they're engaging with online so you can have these conversations. So again, this was a lot of information. I'd love to talk through resources or send you lists. Again, I compiled all of this. This can be sent to you. Deanna Botar at the library is the one who connected me with you today, and she pulled like 50 books aside, and I've actually put them on my resource list. She's done a lot of work here at making sure that these resources are available to you. So again, even contact her. I know she'd be more than happy to help you locate and find some of the books on this list and kind of get you started. I mean, we're talking board books for babies. You cannot start too young. Books for young children, books for teens, books for young adults, and so forth and so on. And again, a couple that I just want to highlight, because again, my goal for you tonight is you have a place to start. Or if you're already on this journey, and some of you are, you've been having these conversations, you're aware of the work of anti-racism, you're committed to doing it. It's about, okay, what is the next step for me? My recommendations, the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. She is a white woman who's written this book to us as white people, trying to, again, work past our own discomfort and our own biases. It is an exceedingly hard book to read, but it is the one book that I think every white person committed to this should be reading. I'm so committed, like if you need a book, I'll buy you a copy of it. So just let me know and I'll have it sent to your house on Amazon. Or I should say this, one of the things that I've been reading and doing is trying to buy from Black-owned bookstores, right? If we're buying these books on race and racial diversity, I have included a list of Black-owned bookstores that you can buy these books from and support Black-owned businesses. In that way, if we're buying these books on race and racial inequality, it's an easy way to help these businesses in that work. Another one that the library has, I told Deanna I was so impressed the library has this book. It's for 8 to 12-year-olds. It's called Not My Idea, a book about whiteness for kids. Again, helping them understand that they have power, privilege, and a voice that they can use. And again, there's nothing wrong with their skin color, but how can they use it to be a source for good? Also, again, if you don't know where to start, I have it linked, the Nickelodeon and the CNN Sesame Street specials. The other thing I think everybody should watch is that documentary 13th on Netflix, or I'm sure it's available other places, but I really think if you don't know where to start, and again, it's a hard documentary to watch, but it really helps us understand history in a way that a lot of us didn't learn in school or didn't get those resources in school. So again, if you don't know where to start or if you haven't watched that yet, that's one thing I would really encourage you to look for and to spend some time watching. And again, probably not for young children, but for middle school and up, I think it's appropriate to start watching those things and having those conversations. So again, if you get this email, you're going to be overwhelmed with the amount of resources, and that's still just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many things out there that you can continue to look and find on your own as well. But please know, if you don't know where to start, that resource list is a great place for you to just figure out. And again, I know from being, I'm a podcast listener. I read books too, but I love listening to podcasts. So that's why I tried to create a really different list of resources, because we all learn in different ways. And it is about how do we learn. And there's even podcasts for parents of how do I talk to my kids about race. So all kinds of materials in different sections. So I'm excited to get that to you. Also in that email will be my personal email address. Please feel free to reach out and ask me questions. Again, I'm not an expert. I may not have the answer, but I'm on this journey with you, and I'm more than happy to process and talk with you about some things and figure this out with you together. Because it's really important, something else, I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, it is not incumbent on us to ask our Black friends or African-American friends or our friends of color to explain race or racism to us. That can be traumatizing, because again, that's work we can do on our own and not expect them to not only live racism, but then teach it to us. It just isn't appropriate. So again, there are certainly opportunities for our friends of color, our Black friends, to engage with us for sure. But when it comes to understanding these systems that are in place, the history in this country and the history in the world, and again, how do we talk to our own kids? That's work that we can do together on our own. So I just want to let you know. All right, so that's all I have. I don't know if there's questions. Hi, Mark Winter. I see my boss.
Do you want to unmute and then open it up? You have to do individuals.
Yeah, if you've got any questions, I mean, if not, we'll send you an email. You'll have my contact information. Feel free to engage.
And they'll be getting a survey at the end as well.
You'll be getting a survey too, so fill it out. And thank the library, guys. Like, I'm so impressed the library wants to do things like this for us, because again, this helps begin to have these conversations and to begin to make some changes. All right, anybody?
People are starting to slowly unmute.
Yeah, go for it. If anyone has a question, go ahead and ask out loud.
I wanted to talk about these. If you've never seen these are written by Representative John Lewis about Selma.
Very
He
cool.
had someone else draw them,
Wow.
but I talk about these
That's
visuals.
amazing.
So if you want to, the first one's out, but if you want to.
Okay. Well, and Sean found these resources too, guys. This is exciting. My child loves graphic novels. And so these were written by John Lewis. If you don't know who John Lewis is, he's one of the, he's a congressman from Georgia, but he was also part of the civil rights movement in the 60s. He's one of the few that's still alive today. And so again, these are actually, there's all kinds of resources here at the library. I love that because again, not everybody likes to sit down and read a book, not every teen or child, but even I love that we have stuff like graphic novels that help teach them about the experience here. So I appreciate that, Sean. Thank you.
And they're beautiful.
Yeah, they're really, I didn't even know those existed. So
yeah.
Well, and the other thing I'll tell you real quick is, like my son, we've worked to get him, I mean, we're living in a cool time. There's more movies than ever. Like my son was obsessed with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I thought was so cool, right? For him to see a black Afro-Latina Spider-Man. He's a little boy. He's like all boys, so he loves superheroes. So Black Panther, you know, those kinds of things we've been able to take him and see like, look, you being represented is normal even in movies. I keep looking at the screen on the camera, sorry about that. Even for him to see representation, right? And so again, we are living in an interesting time where there's more opportunities than ever to show our kids diversity in TV shows, movies, books. Again, we just have to be intentional about how do we show them these things. And again, show them that people in videos, in movies, in books, in TV shows, representing diverse voices is normal, right? And then again, being aware when the shows and the content they're engaging with are not diverse and talking about that with them. And why isn't it diverse? And what is this telling us then? All right, any thoughts, questions?
We sent out the requests for people to unmute. I think nobody's unmuted, so
all right.
I think they may be good.
Well, and again, I will make sure that you get my contact information, so please feel free, reach out. Let's keep having these conversations. Again, I can't promise you I know have all the information, but I can be committed to helping us work together and figuring this out. So thank you for your time, everybody. We appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thanks for engaging. And again, it's just really cool to see so many people show up tonight and want to be a part of this conversation. So, all right.